Welcome to week 5 of our fall 2022 life group series going through the book of Nehemiah. Our theme this fall is rebuild, that with God it is never too late for a new beginning. I want to encourage you in your different life groups. We are halfway through, 4 more sessions counting tonight, and we finish our study this fall. Like Nehemiah, when he was halfway done with his rebuilding project, it's easy to get discouraged and filter away and fall off. I want to encourage you, continue on in being faithful with your groups for these next 4 weeks. We know we have a busy holiday season just around the corner, and we make sure we get our groups in right before that time. So stay committed for the next month together with your group as we finish this study. Today we're looking at Nehemiah chapter 5. We talked about it Sunday in our worship services. You could always go back if you missed our Sunday worship and experience the wonderful leading of our worship team under Allison, and then as well listen to the message from that previous Sunday. Our life groups are based on that. But in chapter 5 of Nehemiah that we discussed on Sunday, we talked about this idea of conflict resolution. How do we resolve conflict in our life? I mean, this is a common theme that you find in a lot of leadership training manuals, and you'll talk about it in the workplace. And oftentimes we could get pulled into trying to resolve conflict based upon the easiest way forward or the path of least resistance. Or perhaps some of us address conflict by not really addressing the issues that are there because we just want peace. Now, others of us are like conflict ready all the time. It's just our personality, or perhaps it's part of the way we kind of grew up arguing and trying to make our point all the time. And so conflict is not something we avoid. It's something maybe we don't mind. In fact, we aggressively pursue. And so how do we balance both of those kinds of approaches? Not just falling back and letting things happen without addressing things, and not being so conflict ready all the time that we're ready to debate and argue even minutia. Here in the book of Nehemiah in chapter 5, he finds himself at a place of conflict with the other men and women in Israel who are rebuilding the wall. And the conflict is a genuine one that they need to address. It's some form of injustice. It's some form of disobedience and evil to the law and to the word of God. And that brings us to our first step in addressing conflict. We talked about those kind of 5 steps that guide us in this path towards resolving conflict God's way. And the first one is this: listen up. In other words, that there is a time to listen when there's an issue at hand. Remember, in the first several verses there, we talk about the idea that there are certain Jews, the poor Jews that are in the land at this time, that find themselves under the oppressive hand of their own countrymen and the government at that time, the foreign government that was in control. We talked about the 3 groups of people. In verse 2, it says, some were saying, our sons and our daughters are numerous. Let us get grain so that we can eat and live. And so they were feeling that they were getting taken advantage of in order to provide for their family. In verse 3, others were saying, we're mortgaging our fields and vineyards to get grain during famine. In other words, we have to do financial maneuvering just to feed our people. Still others were saying, verse 4, we've borrowed money to pay the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards, the foreign leadership of that area at that time. They're saying, listen, we have to mortgage our fields. We have to pay taxes. We have to work and maneuver just to feed our people. And the issue was that many of the ones that were doing it were not just the king, it was their own people. We talked about how in Leviticus 25, 35 to 38, it is super clear that within the nation of Israel, they were not to take interest on the needs and the pain of others, that they were not to lend money at a rate that would be diminutive and hurting of others around them, that they were to be gracious as the people of God. It was an evil to take advantage of the poor among them like this. And oftentimes when conflict arises, we need to have ears that are ready to listen up to really hear what the issue at hand might be. Much conflict is the result of those in power or those having means not being mindful of those that need their help and support, of those that need them to come to their aid. Not all conflict, but much is that way. So listening up. How do we practice this in our life? When there's either interpersonal, one-on-one conflict, or conflict within a group of people, conflict at the workplace. How do we listen well? You know, many of us, and especially New Yorkers, we're good at talking. But listening and making sure we hear others and have empathy towards them, that sometimes can be a struggle. Who do you need to listen to that is trying to bring up a conflict in your life? Secondly, we see the kind of the second step. And remember, I said on Sunday, this is not like a perfectly laid out formula, but I think it gives us guidelines that we see repeated in the New Testament, especially in Matthew 18, about how to address a conflict and issues like this. But secondly, we need to back off, or another way we said it is to hold up. Remember in verse 6, he says, I became extremely angry when I heard their outcry and these complaints. And after seriously considering the matter, I addressed the nobles. Here, we see him listening up, Nehemiah, and as a good leader, now holding up, backing off for a second. His anger was riled up when he saw this injustice that was occurring, this great conflict that was keeping the people of God from rebuilding the wall. Imagine this. You're rebuilding the wall together and you look to the person on the other side and you realize that person's taking advantage of me. Nehemiah is upset about this. But it says here in the text that he seriously considers the matter. The idea is that he slows down. He puts his reason to work. And he starts to look at the situation from all its various angles. And I believe that's another important step for us in conflict resolution, God's way. Listening to the needs, identifying, showing empathy with the pain of others, and then slowing down and saying, Lord, don't let my response be one of immediate reaction of anger. But God, how do I think clearly? And many of us need to do a better job of slowing down when conflict happens. Like I said, for those of you that maybe lean more towards the conflict ready, argumentative ready all the time, personality or background or inclination, this is important, especially for you, to make sure that you're taking the time to back off, let your emotions settle, and really understand the conflict at hand. Most conflicts are not easily remedied with a quick decision right in the moment once you hear the issue. They take some time. So, some of us need to back off. Is there something with your kids, with your spouse, at the workplace, that you need to really hold back and say, Lord, do I understand it? Do I understand really what's going on? Next, we'll move quickly through the last three here. You see him next giving up or owning up, to his own part of this problem. To giving in and recognizing that he had something to play. Look what he says in verse 9. What you're doing isn't right. Remember, they're taking advantage of the poor amongst them. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God and not invite the reproach of our foreign enemies? Now listen to this, verse 10. Even I, as well as my brothers and sisters and servants, have been lending them money and grain. Let us start charging this interest. Return their fields. Do you see it? Nehemiah owning up. Nehemiah himself giving in and recognizing the role that he plays in this as well. Notice that he challenges them here by giving up because he has first of all stood up to them. Remember, there's two parts in the process here going on right at the same time. He listens up, he backs off, then he stands up and owns up. Stands up to address those with courage, and then owns up in his own life how he as well has played a part in it. Standing up, remember, he calls them to this idea that we're to fear God. He calls them that we're to worry about our witness in the world as the nation of Israel, that the foreign countries are supposed to look at us as somebody that are different. We should treat the people of God with great love and respect. We got to stand up when issues like this occur. And then he owns up. Listen, I know that I played a part in this. I have given out grain. I have been lending it as well. I need to admit in my own life where I have been a part of this process, maybe not with the same amount of exploitation, but definitely I'm part of it in some way. So after we listen up and back off, we need to boldly stand up and address individuals, calling them account to God and their witness, and admit where we may play a part in this as well. We talked about in verses 14 and following how Nehemiah then set that example as the governor for the next 12, 13 years or so while he was there, appointed in Jerusalem. That he didn't take money for his job, that he didn't use it in any way that others could point to him, that he was now the exploiter as well. That he, in owning up, became a true servant of those around him. Okay, so let's review before we look at the final one. We listen up when addressing conflict, that there's a time to listen, that there's a time to back off and make sure we're addressing it through reason and peace and humility. Next is this idea of standing up, that we stand up to address the wrong around us. And sometimes in conflict resolution, we need to boldly confront those who are erring, calling them to account to God. Then fourthly, he owns up in his own life, admits the part that he's played. And then lastly, he reaches out. Verse 12, they responded, we will return these things and require nothing more from them. We will do as you say. So I summoned the priests and made everyone take an oath to do this. What does Nehemiah do here? He reaches out. He reaches out to those that have been perpetrating this injustice, that have now been confronted. And in the midst of it, the hope of ultimate conflict resolution is that there might be a reaching across the aisle to be admitting where we have been wrong, humbling ourselves, and rectifying the problem. And this is what he sees lay out for them with the people. That we're going to do it. We're not going to continue to be disobedient to the Mosaic law and take advantage of others around us. We are going to humble ourselves, and we are going to be a part of making things right. And for true conflict to be resolved in our life, there needs to be that last step. How can we reach out to make sure we address what's been wrong, humbly admit it, and come together to move forward? So, think in your own life of a conflict you may be going through right now. What stage or what step in that process of resolution do you find yourself in? Have you truly listened to what the issue is? Do you truly understand why that person or that colleague or that family member and you seem to be butting heads? It takes a lot of humility to sit down and say, can I hear you out? Secondly, do you need to maybe take a step back? Some of us are responding to conflict in our life with anger, and it comes across like something of spite and revenge. We need to slow down, and as Nehemiah did, consider the matter. Thirdly, once you understand things, are you willing to stand up for truth? Are you willing to address injustice? Are you willing to address the areas where you have sinned and where others have, and stand up to call people account to God in humble obedience to Him for the sake of our witness in this world? And then fourthly, are you willing to admit where you play a role in this process? Most conflict resolution, both sides have something to play that they need to admit. Maybe you haven't yet admitted ways that you have fallen short. And that's part of the reason why there's not resolution. And then lastly, it's all about reaching out. There's a time to reach out, to make sure that people are doing the right thing, that you're doing the right thing, and that you are willing to admit you're wrong and move forward. You know, there's always the grace and mercy of God for this in our life, to admit where we're wrong. Not everybody that we're in conflict with is completely wrong. Sometimes it's us. Are you willing to humble yourself like this? And for a follower of Jesus, we know that God is always gracious and merciful, and that we could come to Him with whatever shortcomings and failures, even with others that we have created tension with, and say, Lord, may it start with me, God. I thank you that Christ has died and forgiven me, and Lord, out of that, I don't have to be perfect. I can admit where I'm wrong and find forgiveness from you and from others. You know, as a people of God, we should long for and desire reconciliation more than most. It is the ministry of reconciliation we have been given, as Paul tells us. We've been reconciled to God. We need to be reconciled with each other. And part of that is dealing with conflict God's way, so that others may know God's name, God's glory, and our witness for Him is most important in our life. Okay, get in your groups. Try not to have conflict around your discussion right now, and encourage each other, wherever you're at in that process of reconciliation, to listen up or to for some of you today to back off, to stand up, as well for some of us today to own up, and then to reach out.